Chapter 39. Farewells were the hardest part of life as a ranger, Will thought, as he led Tug out of the castle stable, Shadow following at his heels. He had hoped that perhaps he and Horace and Alice might be able to slip quietly away, but of course that was impossible. They had made friends here over the past months, and those friends wanted the chance to say goodbye. Sir Doric and Merrilon had left the week before, finally reassured that the situation in the castle was stable. The Scandians manned the walls as a temporary garrison. Those who weren't on duty were busy at a small creek a kilometre away, a tributary that ran down to a larger river that in turn led to the sea. The skeleton of their new wolf ship was already laid out on the bank. Now Will stopped. Horace and Alice, leading their horses behind him, followed suit. Orman, Zander, and Mallkallam stood waiting for him. Behind them he could see the bulky forms of Gundar and Nils Ropehander, and behind them the even larger form of Trobar, now sufficiently recovered to leave the infirmary and limp painfully down the stairs to bid his own goodbyes. Will thought he knew whom the giant wished to farewell. Orman spoke first, as was only fitting. Will, Horace, and Lady Alice, of course. I owe you far too much to ever try to repay you. Please accept my gratitude and my friendship as a totally inadequate reward for your services. Horace and Will shuffled awkwardly and mumbled their inarticulate replies. Alice, naturally, took the lead. Lord Orman, it has been our privilege to serve you. You've proved yourself a loyal servant of the king. Orman bowed. You're too kind, Lady Alice, he said. Then he turned to Will. It occurs to me, Will, that I made some unkind remarks about your musical ability when you first arrived. I shouldn't have done that. Will shook his head ruefully. I think your comments were pretty accurate, Lord Orman. The ghost of a smile touched Orman's mouth. Oh, I know they were accurate. I just shouldn't have made them. He became serious for a moment. I'm sorry you lost your mandola, by the way. Will shrugged. Buttle had smashed the mandola in a rage after Will, Orman, and Zander had escaped from the castle. It may be a blessing in disguise, my lord, he said, and the smile returned to Orman's face. Best if I don't comment on that. But Zander has something to say, he prompted. The little secretary stepped out from behind his master. He bowed his head briefly to Will. My gratitude, Ranger, he said. You saved my master's life, and you saved the castle. He looked at Horace. Gratitude to you as well, Sir Horace. Horace bowed. Will couldn't resist a final dig at the secretary. Have you forgiven me for overpaying the Scandians, Zander? Humour was not the secretary's strong suit. His air of gratitude was instantly replaced by the harried manner he usually assumed. Well, you know, I'm sure we could have got them for much less. You really should have consulted me before you... Zander. It was Orman. The secretary stopped in mid-flow and looked up at his master. Drop it. Yes, my lord. Zander hung his head. Sorry, he mumbled to Will. Will shook his head. The man was irrepressible. Don't ever change, Zander, he said. He won't, Orman told him, with some feeling. Then it was time to grasp Mallkallam's hand. The thin, bird-like little man smiled at him. You did well here, Will Treaty, he said. I think all of us will be safer in the future. We understand one another a little better. Will knew that Orman had offered Mallkallam a position in the castle. He hadn't heard if the healer had accepted. "Are you going to move your people into Macindaw?" he asked. Mallkallam shook his head. "They're shy. They don't like being in the public view. I'll stay in the forest with them. If Orman needs a healer, I'll be available." But no more night warrior? No more lights and noises in the forest? The little man tipped his head thoughtfully to one side. "Oh, I don't know about that. Orman has agreed to keep our secret, and the Scandians will move on eventually. I think I'd prefer it if the locals still regarded Grimsdale as a place not to go." "You're probably right," Will agreed. "That reminds me, this is yours." He fumbled in a pocket and produced the black stellatite stone. The day after the battle, he had returned to the tower room and searched the floor until he found it. Up until now, he had forgotten that he had it. The healer smiled. "Oh, that! Keep it if you like. It's just a pebble." "But it's stellatite. It's invaluable. You said—" "I'm afraid I wasn't completely honest with you," Mallkallam said, not the least contrite. "I told you mesmerism was a matter of focus. This gave Alice something to focus on, and that broke the power of the blue stone." Alice and Will exchanged puzzled looks. Then Will turned back to the healer. "Then it's worthless?" "Not completely. The fact that you both believed in it made it valuable. As I said, mesmerism is a matter of belief. You believed this river pebble was a starstone, so it became one." Will shook his head in disbelief and slipped the pebble back into his pocket. "I'll keep it as a memento," he said, "of a very devious healer. Goodbye, Mallkallam. Take care." "Godspeed to you, Will," Mallkallam smiled. "And you, Horace. Maybe with you two gone, I'll be able to get a cup of coffee for myself." Will turned to shake hands with Gundar. He should have known he'd never get away with such a formal gesture. The Scandian seized him in a massive bear hug, lifting him from the ground, squeezing him so that he could hardly talk. "Good fight, Ranger. Good battle. I'll be sad to see you go." "Put me down," Will managed to gasp, and the Scandian set him back on his feet again. He checked his ribs to make sure they were intact. "Drop in and see me at Seacliff Fife some day, Gundar," he said. The skirl roared with laughter. "Ho, ho, ho! We'll come for dinner," he bellowed, delighted at his own joke. "Just make sure you let us know you're coming," Will warned him. This time, Nils joined in the laughter. Alice and Horace were making their own goodbyes. As Will waited for them to finish, he caught Trobar's eye. The giant looked away sadly, and Will walked to where he stood behind the assembled group. Shadow followed, of course. She looked up at Will as he stopped a few paces short of Trobar. She was too well trained to leave his side without permission. "Go on," he told her quietly, and she went to Trobar, her tail wagging in that slow, heavy rhythm of border shepherds. The gigantic man knelt to farewell her, fondling her ears, rubbing under her chin in the way she loved. Her eyes closed with pleasure at his gentle touch. Will felt a sudden heaviness in his heart. He dropped to one knee beside them. "Trobar," he said quietly, "look at me, please." The giant raised his eyes to Will. The ranger could see the tears freely running down the big face. "I think a dog belongs with the person who names her," Will said, his voice a little unsteady. "Shadow needs you more than she needs me. She's yours." He saw the disbelief in Trobar's eyes. The giant couldn't speak. He pointed numbly to his own chest, and Will nodded. Look after her. If she ever has pups, I'll come and take the pick of the litter. He held out his hand to Shadow, palm facing her, in the motion that told her to stay. Stay, Shadow, he said. Then he ruffled her head one last time. Goodbye, girl, he choked. Then, unable to bear it any longer, he rose and walked quickly to where Tug waited for him. His vision was blurred, and he fumbled with the reins as he prepared to mount. The little horse turned his head and looked steadily at his master. I'll make it up to you, the look said. Will swung into the saddle, and Tug's hooves clattered on the flagstones as he trotted towards the drawbridge. Alice and Horace, caught by surprise at his sudden exit, hurried to complete their farewells and follow him. They were half a kilometre down the track before Horace noticed something was missing. He looked around them, his eyes seeking a familiar black and white form. "Where's the dog?" he asked finally. Will kept looking straight ahead. "I gave her to Trobar," he said. Then he touched Tug with his heels and cantered on ahead of his friends. He didn't want to discuss it just now. "Well, I'll be damned," said Horace.